All right, welcome to the Kingdom of Pod. Take a deviation here on this weekly look at Boise State football to look into the basketball program for a moment. I like to deviate when news dictates to go to stories that involve Boise State. That could be conference related or other sports or whatever's making big news. And of course, the loss in the first round of the NCAA tournament qualifies as that. But normally you'll get a lot of Boise State football takes from me. They've taken a little bit of a break from spring ball, although I do have a comment about a player that everybody I think is going to get to know. And Andy Avalos went out of his way to point him out. I have a lot more about him coming up after this comment on just where we're at with the basketball program. And I think, you know, I have followed it as long as the football program, certainly not as closely for obvious reasons. I didn't play basketball. And I've seen the development of the program, and I've noticed in just the last couple of years, and specifically this season, that there's tremendous interest in the program. And from a fan perspective, it seems to have caught fire with groups of people, large groups of people that are buying into beating Mountain West rivals, winning the conference, getting in a good position for the conference postseason tournament, winning it and/or getting into the NCAAs. And that's not as easily attainable and achievable on the football side of things because the expectations are so much higher. There's not much fan interest in beating some of those Mountain West rivals. They're more bought in to beating regional Power 5 rivals or teams or schools or the big games that can happen throughout the rest of the country against Power 5 opponents. It's different. I did do the math one time, and like there's 330 teams eligible to get into the NCAA basketball tournament. We know, let's just call it 64 do, and you compare that to the 130 Division I football playing schools that can get into the New Year's Day 6, 12 spots there. And it's twice as difficult to make it into the New Year's Day 6 in football than it is to make it into the postseason basketball tournament. And then winning a game in New Year's Day 6 versus winning a game or two in the NCAA tournament. So it's difficult, much more difficult. So all of that, I think, applies here. And for the things that Boise State's done in the distant past now, really 2014 is a long time ago from now, those were great accomplishments. And what the basketball program is embarking on and getting to be able to do is remarkable, I think, to those who follow it close enough. They win 24 games. They've won, I think, 51 games is what the Statesman was reminding us of. And they've been to the tournament now a couple of years in a row. I understand nobody's been there more and lost than Boise State. That's nothing to be proud of. That's a bad stat. It's getting repeated nationally. And there is some damage that can happen by that. But the basketball program hasn't had enough top-level success to really get overly concerned with some of that. The Mountain West Conference basketball has been respected in the last, say, 13 years or so. There's been runs by schools. People still, I think, have a certain identity with UNLV in New Mexico, even though they've not come around. Even Fresno has some presence and some awareness. Colorado State's had good teams. We know Boise State's had good teams. Wyoming's put out some teams. But San Diego State and Utah State, 4 out of the 5 last year or 5 years, have dominated things. And they're getting good reputations nationally. So I think it's all growing, and the expectations are different. Nobody expects Boise State to win. Not nobody. Not enough people are saying they should beat Northwestern and then beat UCLA and get into a Sweet 16. I don't think that's the expectation. Why? Hasn't happened before. How could you expect something to happen that's never happened? What you expect them to do is be in a position to compete, to get an at-large bid in the NCAAs, to win the Mountain West Conference, and you expect them to lose at this point because they've produced that kind of result. And when it happens, you're not as upset. And I'm sure they want to change that. And the only way that'll happen is over time, winning some of those games. And people seem to be not only patient, but the fan interest to me has grown. I mean, look at the attendance numbers. They're filling up that arena, and they're looking at throwing out more amenities and making more money out of it. And all of that. I think Leon has done a great job hanging in there with lower resources. And now that was as athletic and a skillful team, 5 or 6 guys deep, that I've seen. Getting his son at first was maybe not as huge of accomplishment as anybody thought, but now look at how much he contributed, and he's got another one in the wings. So there's been a lot of positive things. Yeah. Does he need to have a bench and be able to call on 9 or 10 players? Well, who doesn't? Is that possible? Probably not. It's difficult given where Boise State's at. And I just think I can see that there's a different mentality in the way it's supported, the way it's followed, and the resources that it's given compared to the football program. And you cannot compare these two animals. Football has underachieved compared to the expectations of the great teams of the past. And until they get back to that level of achievement, it's still going to be disappointing for, I think, a bigger percentage of people. The game itself, they just didn't shoot well enough. And we don't need to get into all the details about all of this, but yeah, I thought Northwestern was pretty darn good, and they played with great energy, tremendous defense, and took Boise State out of their offense for long stretches of time. But this is really all about the program and what it represents and who it is. But much to be proud of as a 1-2 punch, a program that's going to NCAA tournaments and a football program that's competing for Mountain West titles, and they hope to compete for a New Year's Day 6 bowl bid here in 2023. So it feels like to me that the wheels are firmly on the tracks and they are ratcheted down and they can get further along. Let me tell you about this, though. If you're not further along with the way you sleep, with the way you feel, with any weight loss that you've tried to do and have not got accomplished, here we are in March. Have you thought about changing everything and going over to Full Spectrum Health? I've been talking to you about this now for 8 weeks. I've tried it. I've done it. I've lived some of these principles. For example, the cold plunging. And what does that mean? 3 or 4 minutes in cold water, and how that changes your body and changes your inflammation and can make ailments go away, that your knees or back or shoulder or whatever your challenges are. I think it's well worth it. So go to full-spectrumhealth.com. You'll get a free consultation to see if it is for you. If you want to get an 8-week program, it's totally encompassing your sleep, how you feel during the day, a diet, an exercise plan, cardio, weights, all of it for a couple of $100. And it's time to attach, I think, some time to your total health and how you're doing 24/7. And I think this is where you can get it done quite handsomely and quite easily. So trust me, you want to email me with any questions, do so. It's pretty easy to get a custom fitness and nutrition plan, fullspectrumhealth.com. That's full-spectrumhealth.com. Let's get back to Boise State football for a second. And they're taking a recess. But one thing that going into the spring season that I thought about was getting more information about a football player that made some noise last fall. I have spoke to others outside of the program that are well aware of this football player, and we're even hopeful that perhaps he was interested in transferring. That wasn't the case. And I think this is a name that you're going to hear a lot more of. Andrew Simpson, weak side linebacker. I'm sure he could line up at other spots. But if you go back and watch what Coach Avalos talked about after the first scrimmage, which was closed to the media, so everybody had to rely on what he had to say. He pointed out that Andrew Simpson was, as Coach Avalos put it, getting consistent pressure on quarterbacks. And that's coming from where he's at on the field. He's a kid that comes out of a high school in St. John Bosco that is highly regarded across the country as a factory now in Southern California for producing great football players, great young men. There's a lot of discipline that goes into going to St. John Bosco. I'm very familiar with that school and the area. And Simpson's story is a little bit different how he landed at Boise State. He was a very early commit to Kansas. And, the Southern California high school folks were going through their own COVID problems during Simpson's senior year, and they were playing football in the spring. So here is Simpson, committing to a school that he hadn't even visited, but he got recruited by a guy, position coach, who left and went to SMU, and by a head football coach in Les Miles, who got fired for behavior off the field. And those things are why he decommitted to the University of Kansas and opened things back up. And he had committed to them even before his senior spring season of high school football. And then he gets released by his letter of from his letter of intent by Kansas. And so that happens in March or so after Miles gets fired. And that's why he wanted to move on. And he ends up committing to Boise State. He's now a redshirt sophomore, because he ended up redshirting his freshman season and then playing last year. And this is a kid I think that we're going to become pretty aware of. I'm sure the media dudes are all over it already, but I think the rest of us are going to catch on really pretty quickly in following his progress. He's fast, he's physical, he's a gamer. I think he's going to be on the field quite a bit. So I bring it up. His stats were good when he played last year. I was looking up some of those. He had pressures and sacks and tackles, and when he got on the field eventually, he was a factor. But I think that's a guy that you should start following, see how he's developing, because I think he could be this missing piece at the linebacker spot that I think they've had since Leighton, a guy that has the speed and the violence and the physical nature at the position. But it should be a lot of fun to see how Simpson does, maybe in the spring scrimmage, or certainly as we get closer to the fall. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Boise State's football podcast that I put together. I call it the Kingdom of Pod. You can search just Boise State Football Podcast or Jeff Caves, and you can always find it. You can subscribe to it. If you're listening to this and you want to watch it, as some people do, in fact, I think as many or more people do, go to my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search Jeff Caves, and you'll find this and past podcasts that are all there. You can hear about Kellen Moore and what happened with the Dallas Cowboys, or a variety of other topics. I hope you rate, review, and pass this along so I can help it grow. And I'll talk to you next time.